One of the most significant events in the history of human innovation took place on March the 10th of 1876. On this date, Alexander Graham Bell spoke into the mouthpiece of a primitive telephone, sending a message by wire to his assistant Thomas Watson. This was the first telephone message. The telephone was born. I recently constructed a working replica of Bell's first telephone transmitter. If you have access to some basic tools and materials, you may be interested in attempting this historically significant project. You can use Bell's actual notes to assist with the design. This image from his notebook, dated March the 10th, 1876, shows his design for the first functioning telephone and describes that historic first phone call. He writes, "The improved instrument shown in Figure 1 was constructed this morning and tried this evening. Mr. Watson was stationed in one room with the receiving instrument. He pressed one ear closely against the receiver and closed his other ear with his hand. The transmitting instrument was placed in another room and the doors of both rooms closed. I then shouted into the mouthpiece the following sentence: 'Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you.' To my delight, he came and declared that he had heard and understood what I said. This first phone call was accomplished with what Bell called a liquid transmitter. Let's analyze his diagram. This is a battery. Current flows from the battery to a brass rod, labeled P in this diagram. The liquid is conductive, allowing current to flow to a small wire W, which is attached to a membrane and suspended so that it touches the liquid. Current then follows this path to the receiving instrument. It is an electromagnet with a movable armature S. The circuit is completed with this return to the battery. Speaking into the mouthpiece, that's M on the diagram, sends sound waves down the tube, causing the membrane to start vibrating. The membrane's vibrations mimic the sound wave vibrations. The wire attached to the membrane also vibrates, moving in and out of the liquid. This creates a varying resistance that causes the current to change with the vibration. This varying current modulates the strength of the electromagnet at the receiving instrument, causing the armature to vibrate, creating sound waves similar to the original spoken words. Let's build one. This was my first attempt. This unit did not work at all. I couldn't adjust the liquid level with any accuracy. This was my next and much more successful attempt. If you understand the basic principles of this liquid transmitter, you can probably design your own. The biggest challenge is adjusting the contact between the vibrating wire and the liquid. I'll explain the design that I came up with. The success of this unit was helped with an innovative idea for adjusting the liquid level from this site, antiquetelephonehistory.com. I soldered a 1/2-inch copper plumbing cap to a 1.5-inch bolt. The bolt threads into a T-nut. The T-nut is inserted into a hole in the transmitter's base, with some copper wire contacting it and exiting out the bottom of the base. This wire is connected to one of the posts on the front of the base. I used a 1.5-inch ABS pipe to create the diaphragm holder. I used a section of a pipe coupler to hold the paper diaphragm in place. I used the backing paper from a sheet of labels for the diaphragm. This paper is plasticized. The coupler pulls over the sheet, stretching it tightly. Next, we need the contactor, the metal wire that will contact the liquid. This is about 1.5 inches or 3 centimeters in length. I used a 22 gauge nichrome wire to create this. We need to connect a very small gauge wire to this contactor. I used a piece of copper from a lamp cord. I wrapped it around a nail to give it some springiness so it wouldn't interfere with the sound vibrations. Next, I soldered one end of the coil to the contactor. Next, I glued the short wire to the center of the diaphragm. Be careful if you use this instant glue. It can damage your eyes and glue skin together. I drilled a large hole in the upper support for the plastic pipe. This hole has to be centered over the copper cup. The plastic pieces push through the hole. I used a 1.5-inch coupler to complete this assembly. With the copper cup in place, mount the upper support. Make sure the contactor is in the cup, but not touching the sides. Next, the small copper wire is connected to a bolt that extends through the back. This bolt is then connected by a wire to the other post on the front of the device. That completes the basic construction. Vinegar is a typical 4 or 5% acetic acid. This is the liquid I will use in this device. I partially filled the cup with vinegar. Next, I have to adjust the liquid level until it just contacts the contactor, the short wire. This contact point can be found by trial and error when trying to do the final adjustment, but an ammeter makes it much easier. With a 6-volt battery pack and an ammeter in the circuit, you can see how adjusting the cup affects the current. 0 milliamps means the contactor is out of the liquid. I tried to find a point where the current bounced back and forth between 0 and 1 milliamps. The contactor just at the surface. Our transmitter is completed. Next, we need a receiver. I opted to use a standard speaker, an electromagnetic device. The signal, though, was so weak that I had to use a pair of amplified computer speakers. With the transmitter sitting indoors, I ran a length of wire out the front door and connected the speakers. I set the video camera adjacent to the speakers and hit record. I returned to the building, closing doors behind me, and then I spoke Bell's words from 1876 into the mouthpiece. "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." This is the message as recorded from the liquid transmitter.
"Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you."
The message is faint and muffled, but it is a message generated by a replica of the first telephone. Mr. Watson probably heard something very similar to this.
"Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you."
It is remarkable that Bell and Watson were able to accomplish this with the tools and technology of the late 1800s. The telephone, of course, has evolved from these primitive beginnings into a powerful, sophisticated device. And I suspect Alexander Graham Bell was enough of a visionary to imagine the possibilities. Even a phone that could display and share his 19th century drawing of that first telephone. As I mentioned, if you attempt this project, adjusting the interface between the liquid and the wire contactor is difficult. Also, the signal is weak, and you will probably need amplified speakers to hear any transmitted sounds. Do not attempt this project if you are unfamiliar with safety issues when working with electricity. You'll find more science and technology related videos at our website, hylaroad.com. Follow the videos link.